The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Union was always filled with voices from hundreds of species. Some voices were sharp and quick, others deep and heavy, and a few sounded like flowing water or metal scraping on stone. On this day, the chamber was louder than ever. The meeting was not about trade, not about borders, and not about war. It was about the young of the core, the strongest predator species known in the galaxy. The core were respected and feared in equal measure. Their adult warriors were larger than most species, with powerful bodies and senses sharp enough to notice a fly from across a hall. Their cubs, however, were worse to handle than any adult. They were fast, wild, and known for biting even their own kind without thought. The core admitted they had no safe method to calm or guide their young. That was why they came before the Union with a strange request. They asked for a caretaker from another species. The chamber filled with gasps. It sounded impossible. Who would accept such a duty when even the parents of the cubs could not control them? What chance did an outsider have? No one wanted to be torn apart by playful yet deadly claws. One speaker after another refused. The bird-like Arin refused at once. The scaled Tsar said their kind would not risk extinction. Even the sturdy rock-bodied Dunar shook their heads. At the center of the hall, the core elder stood tall. His eyes glowed faintly as he looked across the council. He declared that any species brave enough to accept this task would gain the honor of the core and the gratitude of the Union. Yet still, silence followed. Fear was stronger than reward. Then a single human rose from his seat. His name was Tom. He wore no armor and carried no weapon. He was an ordinary man by human standards, dressed simply in the dark blue suit of the Union delegates. His hand lifted slowly as the chamber turned to face him. "I will do it," Tom said. His voice was steady. The chamber burst into noise. Some thought he was joking. Others thought he had misunderstood. Many laughed. Yet Tom stood calmly, his expression showing no doubt. The core elder's eyes narrowed as he studied the human, trying to see if this small being was making fun of them. But Tom did not look away. A Dunar representative rumbled in disbelief. "You cannot mean this. Your kind is soft-skinned. The cubs will end you in moments." Tom replied, "Then I will teach them not to. If no one tries, nothing will change." That sentence silenced many of the voices. The council stared at him, as if he were mad. The core elder gave a deep growl, not of anger, but of surprise. He stepped closer to the center of the chamber. "You would place yourself among our young without shield, without blade, and without fear?" the elder asked. Tom nodded. "Yes. If they are living beings, then they can be guided. They are not monsters. They are only young." Whispers spread like fire. Other species remembered their first meetings with humans. Some recalled how humans had faced storms on harsh worlds without giving up. Others spoke of how humans had strange courage, choosing to explore empty space with fragile ships. Yet still, watching one volunteer to live among predator cubs seemed unbelievable. The core elder lowered his head slightly in respect. "Then, human Tom, the choice is yours. You will live among our cubs. You will see if your courage is truth, or only words. But know this, if you fail, you will not leave alive." Tom answered, "I accept." The Union Council could not believe what they were hearing. A human had just taken the most dangerous role in the galaxy without hesitation. Representatives of different worlds whispered to each other. Some called him foolish. Others called him brave. A few wondered if humans were truly as weak as they once believed. After the meeting ended, Tom was taken aside by members of the Union who urged him to reconsider. They showed him records of past attempts, images of destroyed rooms, and shredded armor appeared before him. But Tom looked at them with steady eyes. He said, "Those who tried before went in with fear. They saw the cubs as threats, not children. I will not make that mistake." That night, Tom prepared for his journey to the core nursery world. He carried little with him, no weapons, no machines for defense, only a small pack with food, water, and simple tools. When asked if he was afraid, he smiled. Fear is natural, but letting fear control me would make me useless to them. The core ships came the next morning. Sleek, dark, and sharp-edged, they looked more like predators than vessels. Tom walked up the ramp without hesitation. The core guards watched him closely, expecting him to show doubt. Instead, he greeted them with calm words and sat quietly as the ship lifted into space. During the long travel, the guards tried to test him with stories of cubs who crushed steel toys with their jaws and tore through cages. They wanted to see him pale or sweat, but Tom only asked questions. What do they like to play with? What makes them laugh? How do they sleep? The guards were confused. They had never thought of their cubs in those terms. To them, cubs were forces of nature, not children to guide. When the ship finally reached the core nursery world, Tom looked out the window. The planet below was covered in thick forests, jagged mountains, and rivers that gleamed like silver under the twin suns. It was a wild place, suited for a predator species. As the ship landed, the sound of distant roars echoed through the air. The core guards glanced at Tom, waiting to see his reaction. He only stood taller, his eyes fixed on the forest beyond. He whispered softly to himself, "Children, not monsters." The doors opened, and heat rushed in. The ground shook faintly, with the steps of something large. Tom took his first step onto the world that many feared to visit. He knew that beyond the trees, the cubs of the apex predators were waiting. The galaxy might have doubted him, but Tom was ready. This was the beginning of a task that would change how every species viewed humans forever. The nursery world of the core was not like the nurseries of other species. It was no safe building with soft walls and quiet rooms. Instead, it was a walled valley carved into the heart of a great forest. The walls stood tall and strong, built to withstand even the strongest strike from claws or teeth. Inside the walls was a wilderness of rocks, streams, trees, and open ground. This was the place where the cubs of the core grew before joining their clans. The core believed their young should learn strength and survival from the first breath. Yet even they admitted that the cubs were too dangerous for any caretaker. The young were born with sharp teeth, strong jaws, and instincts to hunt. Many of the core adults had scars from their own children's play. That was why no outsider had ever stepped into this valley before, until Tom. When the ship landed at the nursery grounds, a group of core elders waited. Their eyes glowed faintly under the twin suns as they studied the human. They expected him to tremble or ask for more guards. Instead, Tom walked down the ramp. Slowly, his steps calm and even. He looked at the valley with curiosity, not fear. The core elder from the council was there as well. His voice was low and steady as he spoke. "Human Tom, you enter the heart of our young. Once you step inside, you will be alone. We will not protect you. If you wish to turn back, this is your last chance." Tom shook his head. "I came to meet them. I will not turn back now." The elder gave a growl of respect. He motioned toward the gates. Massive doors of dark metal opened with a deep rumble. A hot wind rushed out, carrying the smell of wild earth and musk. From within came the sound of growls, hisses, and heavy footsteps. Tom stepped forward without hesitation. The gates closed behind him, sealing him inside. The valley was alive with sound. Birds with bright wings flew between the trees. Insects buzzed in the air. Somewhere nearby, water flowed over stone. But louder than all of that were the calls of the cubs. They were not hidden. They were watching. From the shade of the trees, eyes glowed golden. Small but powerful shapes moved between rocks and bushes. One by one, the cubs revealed themselves. They were larger than wolves, their bodies covered with thick, dark fur. Their teeth gleamed white, and their claws dug into the dirt as they walked. Though they were young, each cub looked strong enough to crush a grown being with ease. They circled Tom slowly. Their growls rose and fell like a storm. Some lowered their heads as if preparing to leap. Others sniffed the air, trying to understand the strange new scent of this human. Most beings would have frozen or run in panic. Tom did neither. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to their level. He made no sudden move. Instead, he extended his hand slowly, palm open, showing he carried nothing. One cub snarled and rushed forward. The core watching from hidden posts. Above the walls tensed. They expected blood in the first moment. But Tom did not move. The cub stopped inches from him, snapping its jaws in warning. Tom only smiled faintly. "You are fast," he said softly, though the cub could not understand words. His tone was calm, not fearful. Another cub leapt toward him from the side. Tom rolled on the ground, not away in panic but into the play itself. He landed lightly and clapped his hands once. The sound echoed across the valley. The cubs froze for a moment, their golden eyes locked on him. Then he crouched again, patting the ground as if inviting them closer. The cub that had leapt at him tilted its head. Instead of striking again, it growled with curiosity. The others moved in tighter. One sniffed at Tom's boots. Another tried to tug at his sleeve with sharp teeth, but Tom gently pushed its nose aside. The core watching could not believe what they saw. By now, most beings would be shredded. But Tom treated the cubs not as enemies, but as children exploring the world. His laughter echoed when a cub tried to paw at his shoulder. His steady hands kept balance when one pushed against his chest. Slowly, the growls of the cubs changed into softer sounds, almost like purrs. The largest cub decided to test him harder. With a sudden roar, it leapt full force at Tom. Its body slammed into him like a falling boulder. The impact threw him to the ground. Dust rose around them. The other cubs growled in excitement. The core guards above leaned forward, expecting the end. But the dust cleared, and there was Tom, lying on the ground with the huge cub on top of him. Instead of fighting back, he laughed loudly. He pushed gently at the cub's chest. The cub growled again, but then paused. Tom reached up and scratched behind its ear. To the shock of the watchers, the cub stopped growling and made a low rumble of content. The other cubs rushed closer, trying to push each other aside to get his attention. Tom sat up slowly, letting them crowd around him. He treated them as if they were not predators but restless children. His calmness spread through them like fire through dry grass. Within minutes, the cubs that had entered like hunters were rolling. On the ground beside him, playing and pawing without rage. High above, the core elder whispered to the others, "No outsider has ever lived more than a breath among our young. Yet this human does not bleed. He does not run. The cubs see him not as prey, not as threat, but as something else." One of the guards growled in disbelief. "He treats them as if they are no danger. He has no fear." The elder watched Tom laugh as the cubs climbed over him. Perhaps that is why they listen. As the suns lowered in the sky, Tom lay back on the grass, surrounded by cubs resting near him, their heavy bodies pressed against him for warmth, their eyes closing in peace. For the first time in memory, the cubs of the core had accepted a caretaker. Outside the valley, news spread quickly among the core. The impossible had happened. A human had stepped into the nursery and walked out alive in spirit, if not yet in body. The galaxy had doubted, but the first day told a different story. Morning came to the core nursery valley with a red glow from the twin suns. Mist rose from the river and drifted between the tall trees. The ground shook lightly as the cubs stirred awake. Their growls echoed across the stone walls as they stretched, shook their heavy fur, and snapped at one another in playful bites. In the center of the resting ground lay Tom. He opened his eyes slowly, feeling the weight of 2 cubs pressed against his sides. During the night, they had huddled around him for warmth. Now they woke and looked at him with glowing eyes. He rubbed his face with both hands, smiled, and sat up among them. The Corps guards, watching from hidden posts, could not believe the sight. No outsider had ever survived a night among the cubs. Yet the human rose calmly as if he had spent the night beside harmless pets. Tom stretched his arms and looked at the cubs. "Good morning," he said, his tone soft and steady. Though they could not understand the words, his calm voice caught their attention. The cubs tilted their heads. One pawed at his boot. Another pushed its nose against his hand. Tom stood and brushed the dust from his clothes. Soon the cubs began to grow restless. They snarled at each other and started knocking over rocks, chasing one another with snapping jaws. It was clear they had more energy than the valley could contain. Normally, the Corps caretakers would leave them to fight until they tired, but Tom had a different idea. He crouched and picked up a smooth stone from the ground. The cubs turned to watch him. He threw the stone lightly across the ground. It skipped and rolled. At once, 2 cubs rushed after it, their claws tearing into the dirt. They caught the stone and brought it back, growling at each other as they tried to hold it. Tom laughed and clapped his hands. The sound made the other cubs curious. He picked up another stone and tossed it farther away. This time, 3 cubs ran to chase it. The Corps guards watched with wide eyes. The human was turning the wild strength of their young into a game. 4. The rest of the morning, Tom kept the cubs busy. He gathered branches and showed them how to stack them into piles. At first, they broke the branches and scattered them in frustration. But when Tom calmly began again, showing patience, the cubs grew curious. They began to mimic his motions, pressing the branches into rough stacks. The smallest cub wagged its short tail in excitement when Tom gave a cheer. The elder, watching from above, whispered, "He changes their rage into play. He gives their strength a purpose." By midday, the cubs were calmer than anyone had ever seen. They lay around Tom, panting from their games, while he sat in the shade of a tree. He used his hands to draw shapes in the dirt. The cubs leaned closer, their golden eyes following the marks. Though they could not know what the shapes meant, they seemed to enjoy watching. Then the first true test came. From the far side of the valley, 2 cubs began to fight. At first it was playful growls, but soon their roars grew louder. One struck with its claws, leaving marks in the dirt. The other leapt forward, teeth snapping. The Corps guards grew tense. Such fights often ended in deep wounds. Normally it was left to nature, for no one dared to step between fighting cubs. But Tom rose to his feet at once. He did not hesitate. He walked directly toward the fighting cubs. The guards whispered in shock. "He will be torn apart." The cubs slammed against each other again, but Tom moved between them. His hands stretched outward, pressing against their shoulders. They roared in anger, their teeth flashing inches from his face. Still, Tom did not flinch. His voice rose, calm but firm. "No." The word meant nothing to them, yet his tone carried power. The cubs paused, confused by the lack of fear. Tom pushed gently but firmly, forcing them apart. He looked into their glowing eyes and shook his head. Then he crouched low, tapping the ground with his hand to draw their attention away from the fight. The cubs growled, still full of anger, but slowly they backed away. Tom picked up another stone and tossed it aside. Instinct overcame rage. The cubs turned and chased it, forgetting their fight. The valley fell silent for a moment. The Corps guards stared in disbelief. No one had ever broken a cub fight without force or blood. The elder whispered, "He does not fight them. He guides them." Tom returned to the shade tree and sat again. The cubs returned one by one, circling him with trust. They pawed at his arms, licked at his sleeves, and settled near his feet. The two who had fought now rested on either side of him, their anger gone. For the rest of the day, Tom continued to guide them. He set tasks with sticks and stones, showed them how to chase flying drones that buzzed through the valley, and even taught them to wait for his signal before rushing forward. When one grew too wild, he used his calm voice and steady eyes to bring it back to order. By evening, the cubs were lying quietly, their heavy bodies pressed against him as they drifted to sleep. Tom leaned against the tree, his eyes closing with tiredness, but his heart calm. He knew this was only the first step, but he had shown them something new. They could listen. They could follow. They could trust. High above, the core elders spoke, among themselves. "Perhaps the human is not reckless," one said. "Perhaps," answered another. "He sees what we cannot. We see predators. He sees children." The elder who had brought Tom to the nursery nodded slowly. "This may change everything. If the cubs can be guided, then our future may be greater than endless rage, and it is a human who shows us this path." That night, the galaxy did not yet know what had happened in the valley, but within the walls, among the fiercest young predators, trust had been born. The twin suns of the core nursery world set slowly behind the jagged mountains. Darkness spread across the valley like a silent wave. The cubs curled close to Tom, their glowing eyes blinking as they drifted to sleep. The night was calm, filled with the soft sound of insects and the steady breath of young predators at rest. But beyond the walls, in the forest shadows, danger moved. A small group of raiders crept between the trees. They were not core. They were a mix of different species who lived outside the law. Their ships had hidden in orbit, cloaked from sensors. They had come for the most valuable prize in the galaxy, core cubs. A single cub, if captured, could be sold for more credits than most would see in a lifetime. To own one was to own a weapon of living destruction. The raiders thought their plan was clever. They knew the core guards stayed outside the nursery walls, never inside. They believed that once past the gates, the cubs would be distracted long enough for them to throw stun nets and carry them off. They did not fear the human, for to them, he was only a soft outsider. Inside the valley, Tom stirred in his sleep. Something had changed in the air. The cubs twitched uneasily, their ears flicking toward the walls. One gave a low growl, too soft for most ears, but Tom heard it. He sat up quickly. His eyes scanned the shadows. Years of human instinct, sharpened by survival on dangerous frontiers, told him something was wrong. He whispered softly, "Stay calm." His voice reached the cubs. Though they did not understand his words, they felt his steady tone. They stayed, near him instead of rushing off. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement near the base of the wall. A shimmer, like light bending. The raiders were using cloaks to hide their bodies, but they could not silence the sound of their boots or the faint smell of metal. The cubs' noses caught the scent. Their heads snapped toward the intruders, growls rumbling in their throats. Tom knew he had only moments before chaos broke. If the cubs charged in blind rage, the raiders might throw their nets. He had to take control. He stood, raising a hand. "Wait!" His voice cut through the rising growls. The cubs hesitated, looking at him. The first raider slipped through the shadows, a net launcher in his hand. He aimed at the largest cub, but before he fired, Tom moved. He picked up a loose branch from the ground and hurled it with surprising force. It struck the raider's arm. The shot went wide, the net flying uselessly into a tree. The cubs roared, their golden eyes blazing. They leapt to their feet, muscles ready to strike. Tom pointed at the intruders. "Not yet. Stay close." His calm but firm voice reached them. The cubs growled, their bodies shaking with energy, but they stayed at his side. The raiders cursed. More of them rushed into the valley, their cloaks shimmering away. Bright lamps on their suits lit up the clearing. They were armed with stun, rifles, and nets. They expected fear. Instead, they found a human standing tall in the middle of snarling cubs. Tom's mind worked quickly. He could not fight with strength. He had no weapons but the land itself. He scanned the valley and saw what he needed. The river cut across the ground, shallow but filled with slick stones. The cubs could leap across easily. The raiders, Wade, down by gear, would stumble. He crouched low, clapping his hands to call the cubs' attention. "This way!" He ran toward the river. The cubs followed, their heavy paws pounding the dirt. The raiders shouted and chased after them. Tom reached the river first. He jumped to the other side, landing on a rock. The cubs bounded after him, clearing the water with ease. Behind them, the raiders tried to cross. As Tom expected, they slipped and fell, their lamps flashing as they crashed into the water. Nets and rifles spilled into the current. Tom seized the moment. He whistled sharply, then pointed. The cubs understood his signal as a call to action. With a roar, they circled the raiders, cutting off their path. The raiders struggled to rise, but the cubs' growls shook the air. Teeth flashed inches from their faces. Still, Tom raised his hand again. "Do not kill." His voice was calm but commanding. The cubs obeyed. They snarled and snapped but did not strike. Instead, they herded the raiders back step by step toward the walls. Above, the Corps guards had seen the lamps and heard the noise. Alarms rang as they rushed to the gates. When the doors opened, the raiders were already cornered, trapped between the glowing eyes of the cubs and the steady stance of the human. The guards surged forward, seizing the intruders with chains. The raiders were dragged away, cursing and struggling. The cubs gave one final roar of victory before settling back at Tom's side. Their eyes shone with pride, as if they understood they had done something important. The Corps elder stepped into the valley. His gaze swept over the scene, the captured raiders, the calm cubs, the humans standing unharmed. His deep voice carried both respect and disbelief. "You faced armed intruders with nothing but branches and courage. You held back our young when they hungered for blood. Tell me, human Tom, how did you do this?" Tom looked at the cubs resting beside him. He placed his hand on the head of the largest, "Because they trusted me, and I trusted them." The elder was silent for a long moment. Then he bowed his head slightly. "You have done what no Corps has done. You have turned fury into control." That night, as the stars filled the sky, the story of the humans spread through the guards. They spoke of how he had faced raiders without fear, how he had turned cubs into allies instead of weapons. Soon the tale began to move beyond the nursery, carried by every messenger and every channel. The galaxy would soon hear that the human was not just surviving among predators, he was protecting them, and in turn, they were protecting him. The bond between Tom and the cubs had passed its first true trial. The raid had ended, but its effect remained inside the valley. The cubs were no longer restless predators with no direction. They now looked at Tom in a new way. Before, they had treated him as a strange plaything, an odd outsider who was not afraid. But after that night, when Tom had stood against raiders with nothing but courage, the cubs saw him as something more. When Tom rose the next morning, the cubs were already waiting. They circled him, not growling, but sitting quietly with ears forward. Their golden eyes followed every movement. Tom stretched, rubbed the sleep from his face, and spoke softly. "You are waiting for me." His voice was steady as always, and though the cubs could not understand his words, they felt the calm in his tone. He decided to test what they had learned. Picking up a flat stone, he held it high. The cub's eyes locked onto it, muscles tense as if ready to pounce. But Tom did not throw it. Instead, he raised his hand and said, "Wait." His voice was firm. He held their gaze, not moving. The cubs growled low, shifting on their paws, eager to leap. Still, Tom held the stone, waiting. The tension grew until finally one cub crouched, but did not move. Then another copied it. Slowly, the entire pack lowered themselves to the ground, eyes still fixed on the stone, but their bodies still. Tom smiled and threw the stone across the clearing. The cubs exploded forward in a blur of fur and teeth, racing after it with roars of excitement. They fought to be first, but instead of attacking each other with rage, they returned together, dropping the stone at Tom's feet. From the walls, the Corps guards gasped. They had never seen cubs wait for a signal. They had never seen them bring something back instead of tearing it apart. Tom crouched and rubbed the head of the smallest cub. "Good," he said warmly. The cub pressed its nose against his hand and rumbled with pride. That day, Tom began a new routine. Each morning, he gave the cubs tasks. Sometimes it was stacking stones into small towers. Sometimes it was chasing the flying drones that zipped through the valley. Sometimes it was simple waiting games, where they sat until his signal came. At first, the cubs grew frustrated, snapping at the ground or growling at each other. But Tom never raised his hand in anger, never struck them, never shouted. He simply repeated the task with patience until they followed. Day by day, their wild energy began to shape into discipline. The Corps elders could not believe their eyes. These were the same cubs that once tore apart cages and bit anything that moved. Yet now they listened to a human voice. They waited for a human signal. They played without blood. At night, when the cubs rested around him, Tom spoke softly to them. He told them stories of human children, of how they learned by playing and listening. He knew they did not understand his words, but the tone mattered. His calm rhythm became part of their dreams. The cubs pressed closer to him, as if his voice gave them safety. The change did not go unnoticed by the Corps guards. One evening, two elders stood on the wall, watching as Tom led the cubs through another task. He had arranged stones in a circle. The cubs sat outside it, waiting. When he whistled, one cub entered, then another, until the circle was full. They had done it without fighting. One elder whispered, "This is not possible. Our kind has tried for generations. We use force, chains, and walls, yet our young obey only rage. But he uses no force, no weapon, and they follow." The other elder nodded slowly. "Perhaps it is because he is not afraid." The cubs sense it. They trust him. Trust was a word the Corps rarely used. Among predators, strength and fear ruled. But in the valley, something different had taken root. The cubs showed their bond in small ways. When Tom walked to the river, they followed in a calm line instead of rushing ahead. When he sat to eat from his small pack, they waited for him before eating their own food. One cub even refused its meal until Tom touched it, as if seeking permission. Tom noticed the change as well. One evening, he sat on a rock while the suns lowered in the sky. The cubs lay around him, their heavy breathing filling the clearing. He looked at them one by one and thought, "They are learning respect." The next morning brought another test. Two cubs began to argue over a branch, growling and pulling at it from both ends. Their snarls grew louder. The old instinct of violence rose. The guards watching tensed, expecting another fight. But Tom was already moving. He stepped between them, his arms stretched wide. He looked at them firmly. "No," he said, his voice strong. The cubs froze, eyes wide. His tone carried weight greater than claws. Slowly they released the branch and lowered their heads. Tom crouched and tapped the ground, offering another branch. This time they took turns, one pawing lightly while the other waited. The fight ended before it began. From the walls came silence. The core elders stood still, watching the impossible. The fiercest young predators in the galaxy had chosen obedience over blood. As days passed, the cubs began to copy more of Tom's actions. When he sat, they sat. When he raised his hand, they grew still. When he walked, they walked in rhythm with him. It was as if he had become part of their pack, not as prey, not even as leader in the old sense, but as guide. At night, Tom lay among them, feeling their warmth against him. He thought of the council, of the laughter and disbelief when he had first accepted this task. He thought of how every species had said it was impossible. And yet, here in the valley, proof surrounded him. The cubs were not monsters. They were children who only needed patience. Above the valley, the elder who had brought Tom here spoke quietly to himself. The galaxy must see this. They must know what a human has done. But within the valley, Tom did not think of glory or legend. He thought only of the cubs and how tomorrow he would teach them something new. For now, the greatest change had already begun. The cubs, once wild and feared, now showed respect, not because of force, not because of fear, but because of trust. The sun rose slowly over the jagged mountains surrounding the core nursery valley. Tom stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the massive arena that the elders had prepared. Unlike the nursery, this arena was a harsh landscape of rocks, pits, and obstacles. The elders had designed it to test not only strength but intelligence, strategy, and control. Today, Tom would not only show his own courage, he would prove what the cubs had learned. From the gates of the arena, the cubs stepped forward, their golden eyes shining in the morning light. They were silent now, disciplined and calm. The largest cub walked beside Tom, brushing against him lightly. The other cubs followed in a loose formation. The core elders watched from high platforms around the arena, their expressions unreadable. Many species from nearby worlds had come to witness the trial. Rumors of the human among cubs had spread quickly, and curiosity was strong. As the gates closed behind them, the trial began. The first obstacle was a shallow chasm filled with loose stones. Normally, the cubs would leap recklessly, some slipping and some fighting for position. Today, under Tom's guidance, they stopped at the edge. Tom crouched and pointed to the stones. One by one, the cubs tested the surface, finding secure footing. When all were across safely, Tom clapped his hands in quiet praise. The next challenge was a maze of rocks and logs. Hidden sensors would trigger alarms if the cubs touched certain stones. The core guards expected failure. But Tom did not panic. He walked slowly, calling the cubs to follow. They listened, moving in rhythm with him. When one cub hesitated, he touched its shoulder gently and nodded. The cub moved forward carefully, matching his steps. The audience gasped. No being had ever guided core cubs through this maze without them breaking rules or attacking obstacles. Yet here, the cubs followed a human's lead. Suddenly, a hidden platform released a swinging log meant to test reflexes. The cubs jumped with precise timing, avoiding the log. Tom caught the smallest one with a quick move when it lost balance, steadying it without fear. The crowd murmured in astonishment. The human had not only survived the nursery, but was now guiding apex predators through a trial designed for failure. The arena became harder. Pitfalls, steep rocks, and moving obstacles challenged every step. The cubs growled at each other, but not in anger. They communicated, coordinating their moves as if a single mind guided them. Tom raised his hand, signaling them to wait or move, and each time they obeyed instantly. From the platforms, the core elders whispered among themselves. They move as one. He leads without force. They obey without fear. Never have we seen this. The final obstacle was a steep cliff with only narrow paths. The cubs would normally charge without caution, some falling to the jagged rocks below. Tom approached the cliff carefully. He looked at the cubs and raised both hands, signaling them to stop. They paused at the edge, eyes fixed on him. One cub stepped forward and looked down. Tom squatted, placing a hand on the edge, showing the safest path. The cub hesitated, then followed his example. One by one, the cubs descended carefully, trusting the human's guidance instead of rushing blindly. The audience erupted in quiet applause. Never had a human, or any species, shown such control over core young predators. The final step brought them to the center of the arena, where Tom stood waiting. The cubs gathered around him. Their eyes shone with pride, and their fur gleamed in the sunlight. The core elders descended from the platforms. Their faces were serious, but their eyes reflected awe. The largest elder stepped forward and addressed the crowd. Today, we witness something new. A human has not only survived among our young, but has taught them trust, patience, and discipline. This trial was made to break beings, yet it has shown unity and respect. Today, the galaxy sees the strength of human courage. Tom did not raise his head arrogantly. He only looked at the cubs, gently patting their heads. "You did this," he said softly. Though they could not understand words, the tone carried meaning. They responded with soft rumbles, tails wagging slightly. One of the cubs, the smallest, stepped forward and pressed its nose against his hand. Tom smiled. It was the gesture of trust he had hoped for from the beginning. These cubs were no longer wild, untamable creatures. They were disciplined, aware, and loyal. The audience of other species could not hide their amazement. Creatures that had thought humans fragile now whispered among themselves. Some looked at each other with new respect. If a human could guide apex predator cubs, what else could humans accomplish across the stars? After the trial, Tom led the cubs back to the nursery valley. They walked quietly, each cub staying close but independent. They no longer needed his hand to guide every step. The lessons of the trial had shown them their own strength and control. At the edge of the valley, the core elders approached Tom. "You have done what none believed possible. Our young have learned trust and patience, something even our strongest. Elders could not teach. For this, we honor you. For this, the galaxy should honor you." Tom shook his head. "I only did what any caretaker should. These cubs are not weapons. They are children who can learn. I only showed them the way." The eldest core spoke, his voice deep and resonant. "What you have done will change the way the galaxy sees your kind. Courage, patience, and trust are as powerful as any claw or fang. You have proven humans are not weak. You have proven humans can lead without fear." The cubs pressed around Tom, their bodies warm and heavy against his legs. They had faced the trial together, guided by his calm presence, and emerged victorious. For the first time, a human had shown the galaxy that even the deadliest young predators could be disciplined without force. That evening, as the sun set, and the sky turned shades of red and purple, Tom looked at the valley filled with cubs resting peacefully. The trial was over, but the bond they had built would last a lifetime. The core elders returned to their platforms, whispering to one another about the future. The galaxy would soon hear of this trial. Stories would spread, and all would know of the human who had faced the deadliest cubs without fear and had guided them to discipline. The news of Tom and the cubs traveled faster than any ship could fly. Across the galaxy, beings of all kinds paused to listen to the story. Traders in distant markets, scholars in distant starports, and even warriors on battle worlds spoke in awe of the human who had entered the heart of the core nursery and emerged unscathed. But for Tom, the attention mattered little. He stood in the valley, The cubs gathered around him, their golden eyes gleaming in the early light. The twin suns rose slowly, casting long shadows over the rocks and trees. Today was a quiet day. There would be no raids, no trials, only learning, trust, and play. The cubs had changed since the raid and the arena trial. They no longer fought over scraps or leaped without thinking. They followed Tom, listened to his signals, and showed respect not because of fear, but because of trust. This was a bond unlike any other in the galaxy. The core elders visited him again. "You have proven something the galaxy thought impossible," one elder said. "You have shown that patience and courage can guide the deadliest young predators. This is a lesson that will not be forgotten." Tom smiled, shaking his head. "It is not about showing power. It is about understanding. These cubs are like children learning about the world. They respond to care, not threats. I only followed what felt right." The elders nodded. "Perhaps humans are stronger in ways we have never known, not in claws or teeth, but in spirit." That afternoon, a new challenge came. Scouts from a neighboring world arrived, curious and cautious. They had heard the stories and wanted to see if the tales were true. When they entered the valley, they saw Tom sitting quietly, surrounded by cubs lying calmly at his feet. One scout, a tall being with silver skin and sharp eyes, spoke. "We heard a human walked among the deadliest cubs and lived. Is it true?" Tom looked at the cubs, then at the scout. One cub raised its head, staring at the newcomer with alertness, but it did not growl or attack. Tom smiled. "It is true," he said simply. The scout stepped closer, watching the cubs circle Tom. "They obey you?" "They trust me," Tom replied. "They follow because they know I care, not because they fear me. Strength is shown in guidance, not dominance." The scout nodded slowly, impressed. "This changes everything we thought about humans." Word spread further. Soon, ambassadors, scholars, and even children from distant planets visited the valley. Each wanted to see the human who had earned the trust of the deadliest cubs in the galaxy. Every visitor watched as Tom moved calmly through the cubs, guiding them, playing with them, and teaching them lessons of patience and care. The cubs had become a living example of the human spirit. They were powerful, fierce, and intelligent. Yet they listened and learned. It was a demonstration that the galaxy had never seen before. Tom taught them more than survival. He taught games that required strategy, cooperation, and focus. The cubs learned to take turns, to watch each other's movements, and to respond to signals with precision. Each day, they grew more disciplined, more aware, and more respectful of the human who had led them without fear. The core elders came to watch these lessons. "Never have we seen such harmony among our young," one whispered. "He has taken creatures of chaos and made them partners in learning." One evening, as the sun set in fiery colors, Tom sat on a large stone while the cubs rested around him. He looked at each one, remembering the first day he had entered the nursery valley. The cubs that had growled, lunged, and snapped at him were now calm, attentive, and trusting. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "You have done well," he said softly. Though they could not understand the words, the cubs pressed closer, showing their bond through presence. From above, the core elders watched in silent admiration. They had brought Tom here to test him, never expecting that the cubs would not only survive, but thrive under human care. They whispered among themselves about how this moment would be remembered for generations. The valley became a place of legend. Visitors came from systems far and wide, not only to see the cubs, but to learn the secret of the human's courage. Tom shared his lessons simply: patience, calmness, understanding, and trust. The cubs demonstrated that even the deadliest predators could be guided without violence. In time, the story spread throughout the galaxy. Beings spoke of the human who faced young predators with no fear and earned their loyalty. Children learned The tale as an example of courage. Scholars studied it as a demonstration of leadership. Warriors admired it as proof that strength could come in forms beyond combat. Tom continued his work quietly. Each day, he played, guided, and taught the cubs. They learned new skills, responded to his signals without hesitation, and showed their trust in every step. He never used force, never raised his voice in anger, and never sought glory. Yet the legend of his actions traveled across systems, inspiring beings everywhere. The cubs grew stronger and smarter, but their bond with Tom remained unbroken. They saw him as a guide, a teacher, and a protector, and Tom saw them as students, companions, and reminders of the power of patience and courage. As the years passed, Tom and the cubs became a symbol of hope, a reminder that the galaxy was full of possibilities, that even among the fiercest predators, trust and care could create harmony, that one human with courage and understanding could change how the galaxy saw strength and leadership. The core. Elders once skeptical and fearful now spoke proudly of the human among their young. "He has shown the galaxy what we always hoped for," one elder said. "That courage, patience, and respect can create power stronger than claws or teeth." Tom looked at the valley, the suns dipping below the horizon. The cubs lay around him, purring softly, their golden eyes closing in sleep. He smiled, knowing that the legend was not only about him, it was about the bond they had created together. The galaxy would remember this day. It would remember the human who faced fear with courage, who guided the deadliest cubs without weapons, and who taught the power of trust. And in the heart of the core nursery valley, the cubs slept peacefully, dreaming of tomorrow, knowing that their guide, the human with no fear, would always be there. The legend of Tom and the cubs became a story, told across stars, a symbol of what could be achieved when understanding triumphed over fear. The galaxy would never forget the day it witnessed humans rise in courage, not through violence, but through trust and wisdom.